Hello everyone, my name is Abigail Carper, and today we're going to be talking about selection by consequences, a core assumption of ABA. The definition of selection by consequences is behavior as a function of its past environmental consequences. And what that really means is that we're going to be talking about operant conditioning, learning history, and the idea of reinforcement and punishment. The applications of selection by consequences has three major fields of biology, psychology, and anthropology. Biology deals with Darwin's evolution of the species. His selection by consequences stated that traits that survive are passed down. Psychology, which is our main concern, is dealing with operant conditioning and learning behavior. Lastly, anthropology, and Skinner stated that verbal behavior led to the evolution of cultures. Selection and behaviorism. Radical behaviorism studies external events, which are determined by the environment. This is in sharp contrast to cognitivism, which deals with the mind and states that environment is inconsequential, that the environment does not determine behaviors, but rather inner processes of the mind determine behaviors. Behaviorism accepts that the environment determines courses of action. Skinner and selection. Skinner was highly influenced by Darwin, his environmental conditions that determine survival. And at the same time, he was also working on operant conditioning, which was behavior led to a consequence, and that could either be reinforcing or punishing, and the learning history, and the selection by consequences dealt with reinforcement, not processes in the mind. Watson and Skinner differed on many things, but selection was another thing that they differed on. Watson was infamous for his dozen healthy infants statement and wanted to do away with the word instinct. He believed that all adult behavior was determined by the environment. Skinner called him an enthusiastic specialist in the psychology of learning. Skinner was also an environmentalist and stated that the environment causes us to select behaviors. If behaviors are successful, we will act that way in the future. But his idea of control was not just the current environment, but also the learning history. So he dealt heavily with operant conditioning. The controversy of selection. So Skinner said that the controversy of selection had to do with the beloved mechanistic theories in the four major areas of religion, which dealt with the prior act of creation, and selection by consequences was perceived as a threat to established faith accounts. There was a certain essences, which was biological in nature and dealt with molecules, cells, genetics, and that determined behavior. Then there was the idea of goodness, that whatever was good for the culture or good for the individual led to behavior. And then the concept of free will, where we get to determine what we're doing, and that is not based on the environment. So why this matters. There would be no behaviorism without selection by consequences, and we would be forced to revert to cognitivism, because selection by consequences deals with the environment and cognitivism does not. It deals with the imaginary concept of the mind. The resistance to selection by consequences is that selection by consequences is countercultural. We live in a culture that is very much with the concept of free will and the initiating agent. And to accept selection by consequences, there would have to be a major change in our perception. The response that we can have to these protests are to state the facts of selection by consequences and reiterate the application of behaviorism to create a better world. In summary, we can say that selection by consequences is a core assumption of behaviorism, and it involves operant conditioning. It was inspired by Darwin's evolution of species and can be used in biology, psychology, and anthropology, which, of course, psychology is the most pertinent to us. Watson and Skinner differ on the role of the environment, and selection by consequences is resisted heavily. It displaces free will and is seen as countercultural. And how we can respond to these protests is to use the facts in applications of behaviorism. And here are the references that I used for this presentation. Thank you for watching.